Hi, this is Mary Lanza, and I'm the author of Losing the Boomer Blues. And it is a trilogy. There's 3 books in the series. I just published the second one, Boomer Chicks, and I am working on the 3rd book, Boomer Chicks Mask Up. So, here I am, and there you are, and we're waiting for the election to decide, our votes to decide who's going to be the next president of the United States. Hopefully we can unify our country, bring it back together again. It's been so divided. So may the best man win, and that's Joe Biden. Okay, so that's all blue. Blue, blue, blue. So when I first started writing Losing the Boomer Blues, I had no idea what was in store for us. I had no idea whatsoever. I started writing it. My thoughts about it began in 2016. And I published the first book, Losing the Boomer Blues, in 2018. And then I revised it because I wanted a cover that popped out. Being a novice at all this, I decided that I'll take people's advice and you have to have a cover that pops out in color. The first one didn't, so we added color to Gordon Matney's wonderful, beautiful illustration. And I got in touch with a beautiful graphic designer, and graphic artist, and she added the color. So I revised it and changed it up a little bit in the inside too. And then I went on to write the second book, Boomer Chicks. And that's what I want to talk to you about right now. So this is the second book in the Losing the Boomer Blues trilogy. And I would like to read a little bit to you. And like I'm going to read a little bit to you every day, just like I did with Losing the Boomer Blues back when. And we're going to give you a little bit of an introduction here. And every day I'll come back and read you a little bit more. Introduction. Boomer Chicks is a prequel to Losing the Boomer Blues. It goes back in time to 1964 when the Chicks first met. The enchanting city of San Francisco is the perfect backdrop for these 3 hip personalities. Mary Jane and Lucy are flower children marching together, determined to end the war in Vietnam and abolish racism. With the dawning of the age of Aquarius, their lives move in a positive direction. They are hopeful that peace and freedom will prevail for everyone. They strive to make the world a better place by being active participants in the San Francisco hippie movement. Follow Mary Jane and Lucy along on their journey from high school sophomores to 60s hippies to becoming wives and mothers. The summer of love sets their lives on a path of growth, love, and enlightenment. Chapter 1. City Girls. Mary Jane and Lucy were born in 1949, making them part of the baby boomer generation. The girls' parents were members of the greatest generation, thus their parents experienced the misery of the Great Depression and World War II. Many members of the greatest generation grew up in poverty, so they had to work hard to survive. The silent generation followed the greatest generation, and they were the most prosperous. Keeping their nose to the grindstone, this generation enjoyed a strong economy. Many feared speaking out, yet some members of the silent generation dared to. During the civil rights movement, these brave souls influenced baby boomers. They were poets, songwriters, and activists who worked together to end racial discrimination. The Beatles, Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, and Martin Luther King Jr. were members of the silent generation. The 60s was a new age filled with hope. The baby boomer generation, with the example of activism set by their silent generation predecessors, were determined to fight for freedom, equality, and justice for everyone. Mary Jane and Lucy were teenagers during this historical era. The three impressionable teenagers learned a lot from their parents. Their parents stood with their black co-workers and fought for fairness in the workplace. They knew that racism was wrong and they wanted it gone. They were willing to do whatever it took to change things. It wasn't an easy task, but living in a progressive city helped. Mary and her parents attended Martin Luther King Jr.'s civil rights rally in June of 1964 at the Cow Palace. The gathering was an interfaith rally with an attendance of 15,000 people. Mary's parents embraced Dr. King's struggle to erase racism. They were strong supporters of his activism. Mary felt the rally opened her eyes. She learned through Reverend King's speech that the passing of the Civil Rights Bill was critical to ending racial discrimination. Jane, who had lost her mother at an early age, was extremely close to her father. He worked as a janitor for Cadillac on Van Ness Avenue. The dealership refused to hire African Americans for any position other than janitors. He joined the picket line one day in support of his co-workers. He took the risk of losing his job and stood up for job equality. That was the kind of man he was, and Jane loved him for it. Lucy's father and mother participated in sit-ins throughout the city to end racial discrimination. Her parents were elementary school teachers. They were in favor of integrated neighborhoods and schools. Her parents supported the Rumford Fair Housing Act in California, which was passed in 1963 to help end racial discrimination by property owners and landlords who refused to rent or sell their property to non-white buyers. San Francisco became part of the national civil rights movement in the early 60s. Citizens were organizing to bring about good-paying jobs and fair housing to people of color and put an end to racial discrimination. President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act into law in July of 1964. But more needed to be done to bring about racial equality in America, and these three girls, on the shoulders of their parents' example, were determined to do their part. And I'm getting toward the end of my 10-minute session with you today. And I started writing this long before the horrible pandemic and of course the horrible outcome of electing a president who seemed to be quite silent when it came to protecting the rights of those on the left side as opposed to those on the right side. That was quite alarming. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'll come back at you tomorrow, and we'll move on to the City Girls. And we'll continue on with Boomer Chicks tomorrow. So ciao for now. Have a nice day. And let's hope that Biden wins. I'm going to try to figure out how to turn this thing off. Jeez. Sorry about this.